Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. It's great to be with you today. Yes, I am Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for this hour, in which we learn how to explain, defend the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And we look at things from all sorts of different angles here. We do cross-fitness training when it comes to defending the faith. So we might look at explaining existence of God one episode, might look at pseudo-Christian cults the next. You never know. And today we have a newcomer, is Peter Cavallaro, and he wrote a book that I think is very fascinating. It's a kind of new approach to explaining the faith, and the book's called Fragments, a Theological Story. So we're going to have Peter on the other side of the break. Going to talk about his book, talk about his background, and kind of introduce you to him. Great guy. Talked to him last night, and that's what I love about the dojo is we get to meet new people, try out new things, and sharpen our skills for the glory of God. And before I begin, I want to thank all of you for supporting the Apocrypha Apocalypse project that I unveiled there on YouTube. And if you haven't heard about it, please check it out. Go to the search engine, type in Apocrypha Apocalypse or Gary Michuta, and that's my new channel. I've been doing a lot of research over the years on the issue of why Catholics and Protestants have two different Old Testament canons. Protestants are missing 7 Old Testament books. And so I started this project on YouTube because I want to put in video form things that Protestants would never, ever know about it. In fact, I'm going through and doing some debunking videos. And man, there are just terrible. There's so many, and there's so many bad videos as to why these 7 Old Testament books are really human apocrypha. So I'm trying to blow the lid off it, do a real unveiling. And that's exactly what apocalypse means in Greek, to reveal or unveiling. So please, if you could, go there, jump on the search engine, type in Apocrypha, Apocalypse, and if you could, subscribe, do all those things that you can, because that helps with the exposure, and that makes it more possible for me to reach our separated brethren, and God willing, help them to reconsider whether they have the whole Word of God, and that they really need to embrace the fullness of what God has revealed in Scripture, that unfortunately their Protestant heritage has rejected. And many, many Protestants today aren't even aware of these Old Testament books, and they're largely rejected because they teach specifically Catholic doctrine. So check it out, folks. I really appreciate it. I know many of you have subscribed. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Also, for those who are about to subscribe, also, thank you. Thank you. And as I'm handing out thank yous, I want to welcome on board everybody watching live stream, Facebook, YouTube, and all the other platforms we stream on. Hello, everybody. Good to see the familiar names there in the social media section of the dojo. Also want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country and via podcast around the world through either our handy-dandy phone app or our flagship website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And welcome aboard. It's always fun to be here. It's always fun to do apologetics. I tell you, every day I wake up, the motivation for waking up is to make our Lord better known and loved. And doing it with apologetics is just plain fun, as well as a great way to share the love of Christ with others. Also, as you know, every episode we look at informal fallacy, a logical fallacy to help us sharpen our critical thinking skills. Today's Finding the Fallacy, by the way, is the appeal to ridicule. And we also meet an early church father There's so many early church fathers, early Christian writings that we use to defend the faith. It's good to have a background, at least a general view of each father, because they're each important witnesses in their own way of the ancient faith. Today's early church father, by the way, is Firmilian of Caesarea. So got lots of great stuff in store for us. By the way, have any questions for our guest, you can also give us a call at 888-526-2151. It's 888-526-2151. Or you can also email us at the official Dojo mailbox, which is questions@handsonapologetics.com. All right, well, let's jump to the finding the fallacy for today. Like I said, it's the appeal to ridicule. And the appeal to ridicule is an informal fallacy which presents an opponent's argument as absurd, ridiculous, or humorous, and therefore not worthy of serious consideration. And man, this informal fallacy has taken root on social media, internet. It's terrible because people think, and this is exactly what the appeal to ridicule is, if you can make fun of a position, make it look silly, that somehow you refute it, right? But you can make fun of all things that are true. You can make fun of the fact that the earth is round, it revolves around the sun. You can make fun of math and all sorts of stuff, but that doesn't mean it's false. It's just that you mock, you ridicule it. And really what this fallacy does is it sends in a social cue to the listeners that, listen, this position is not worth looking at it. Don't consider it. Don't think about it. Just move on. It's like all those cop movies you see on TV and movies. There's a murder scene and the cops there, move on, move on. There's nothing here, nothing here. But there is something there, right? And so that's really what I think the strength of the appeal to ridicule is, this idea that if you can mock something, make it look absurd or ridiculous, that kind of gives a cue to the listener that, you don't need to really seriously consider it. And of course, that's not refuting it. It's not refuting it. So that is our finding the fallacy for today, the appeal to ridicule. Let's go to meet the early church fathers. Today's early church father, I would say probably 99% of even Catholic apologists may have heard the name but have no idea who he is. It's Firmilian of Caesarea, died around AD 268. Firmilian was Bishop of Caesarea in Cappadocia, and he's a contemporary of St. Gregory the Wonder Worker. And like the latter, he was an ardent admirer of Origen, but he is remembered mostly for his moral support that he gave to Cyprian, the Bishop of Carthage, when quarreling with Pope St. Stephen I over the question of the baptism of heretics. As you recall, Cyprian kind of ran into loggerheads with the Pope on this issue because Carthage had undergone a persecution in North Africa, and many people forsook the faith simply to avoid persecution. And that includes people who were maybe not even Christian, that maybe they joined a heretical sect and were baptized. So the question is not only how to lapse those who forsook the faith were to come back, but also about the validity of baptism amongst heretics. Of course, the Pope said that, yes, as long as they have the proper matter, form, and intent, it is valid. So even a heretical group can validly baptize. They could validly administer the sacrament. Where Cyprian felt otherwise. He thought that, no, you cannot. And that's where Firmilian of Caesarea comes in. He's the one that loaned its support to Cyprian. And we have a single writing of his. I'll talk about that in a second. And he died around the year 260 AD or shortly thereafter. We do have one extant letter from him, the letter to Cyprian. And whatever he may have written, there's only a single letter, and it's only in the Latin translation. It's letter 75 in the Cyprianic Corpus. And there also is preserved two extant fragments of letters of Pope St. Stephen I as well in that corpus. It appears that he wrote in Greek, and this was translated into Latin, so we don't have the original document. Now, although he was wrong on the question of the baptism of heretics, nevertheless, his writings do evidence certain things about the Catholic faith at this time, and they're still important. So let me read a couple of quick quotes for you before the break comes up. He writes, quote, "And other heretics as well, if they have parted themselves from the church, can have nothing to do with the power and grace, since all power and grace is settled in the church, where preside presbyters who possess the power both of baptizing and imposing hands and of ordaining." So again, he's witnessing to the church having presbyters or priests, and that priests have this power and authority to administer the sacraments. Later on, he says, quote, "Inasmuch as Stephen and those who agree with him contend that the remission of sins and the second birth can take place in the baptism given to heretics, even while they admit that the Holy Spirit is not present among the heretics, let them take thought and understand that there is no spiritual rebirth without the Spirit." Now, again, although he's wrong on the issue of the baptism of heretics, nevertheless, notice he shows the belief that baptism remits sin and you receive the Holy Spirit in baptism. So he may be wrong on the application, but nevertheless, he is a witness of the ancient faith in regards to the baptismal regeneration that takes place while we're baptized and our reception of the Holy Spirit. Let's see. He also says it is absurd also to think that they do not think it necessary to inquire as to who it was that was baptized, to baptize anyone, on the grounds that that was baptized is able to receive the grace through the invocation of the Trinity, of the names of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And that is our early church father for today, Firmilian of Caesarea. Coming up next, we're going to be chatting with Master Apologist Peter Cavallaro about his book, Fragments, a Theological Story. Stay tuned, folks.
Leviticus 11:44 says, "Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy." St. Vincent Pallotti said, "You must be holy in the way God asks you to be holy." God does not ask you to be a Trappist monk or a hermit. He wants you to sanctify the world and your everyday life. May God show us the path to holiness and help us to follow it all the days of our life.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-on Apologetics. And we have our new friend here with us. He's Master Apologist Peter Cavallaro. And Peter has studied history and classical medieval philosophy at Georgetown University, graduated from Cornell Law School, summa cum laude. He's currently practicing as an attorney in New York, and in the past he's published scholarship on constitutional law. And he is also the author of the book Fragments, a Theological Story. And Peter, welcome to Hands-on Apologetics.
Gary, it's my pleasure to be with you. You got a great show, you're doing great work, and I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Peter, since you're new to the show, I ask all my guests if you could maybe just give us a thumbnail sketch of, how your journey of faith, how you got interested in apologetics, that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, one thing I noticed is a lot of Catholic apologists are converts to the faith, or at least converts to the church, and I think that's a great thing. It's definitely understandable where they get the spark to do the work that they do. But I don't have that. For me, I'm Catholic, born and bred, close-knit Italian-American, New York family. I was raised in the faith, went to church weekly. I received the sacraments. I went to a Catholic high school, Chaminade High School in Long Island. But for me, the ordinariness, I think, of my Catholic upbringing provides a spark of a different kind, now having approached the, I think, apologetics mission, which is, while, of course, as an apologist, our role is to reach out and connect with unbelievers and people outside our church, I think it's equally important to minister to the needs of our brothers and sisters who are within the church. And in a sense, I think, from the cradle, Catholics sometimes face challenges that are, unique in terms of really almost coming to the idea that maybe their faith doesn't actually have any teeth to it when presented with arguments and objections from the outside. And so I think the ordinary upbringing that I have in the church kind of provides my fervor for making sure that ordinariness does not create a laxitude, so to speak, within the faith.
That's true. I'm a cradle Catholic as well. And so I totally get where you're coming from, because, when you're doing apologetics, the only people that'll talk to you are anti-Catholics. You go to your parish, though, they don't have a clue what you're talking about. And many times I ended up doing more apologetics trying to get other Catholics up to speed rather than actually going outside the church.
And, I think obviously the end goal for all of us is to find God, have an encounter with God. And there's certainly a good number of people, cradle Catholics, who, they may not be, it may not be necessary for them to delve into the primary texts of Thomas Aquinas, and, that's not for everybody. But I think that Catholics especially have sometimes a bad rap for not always engaging their intellect with their faith, whether it's in the context of scriptural exegesis, or whether it's in the context of doctrinal matters or philosophical matters. It's sometimes easy to kind of cruise on autopilot, and that doesn't always work for everybody, because at the end of the day, we're always asking intellectual questions, whether we know it or not. And if you have been raised not to think of the church as a source for not just faith, but also intellectual satisfaction, you might find that your beliefs come up short. And so I think it is important for a good number of academically oriented Catholics to take the time to think through arguments that both support and critique their views. Yeah,
that's interesting, because I know that there are many Catholics, they grow up in the faith, they're good churchmen and church women. They go off to college, and it's almost like they just don't appreciate that there's this whole intellectual aspect of the faith that they just never tapped into, and often they're confronted with objections, and they don't even look to see if Catholicism has an answer. They just leave.
Right.
Yeah.
And Gary, I would say, so in terms of my faith journey, while I don't have a conversion to the faith or even the church, I would certainly delineate two important periods of my life, which is before I went to college, and I sort of just had the more meat and potatoes Catholic upbringing, which doesn't really separate me from anyone else in the faithful. And once I arrived at college and being intellectually curious and being blessed with the opportunities to delve into a number of subjects along this line, from that point on, I would say, is where I kind of was able to explore the nooks and crannies of our faith, from a more intellectual point of view, in the theological and philosophical context. So I was very lucky to have attended Georgetown University, which is a fine research institution that's got first-rate faculty, but it's also a Catholic school, so it's got that overlay to it. Even among highly regarded schools, they may not always necessarily offer a class on the political philosophy of Thomas Aquinas or on the early church fathers. But thankfully, Georgetown did have those opportunities, and I took them. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were interested in medieval and classical philosophy. So you always have this bent towards philosophy?
I didn't. And I think, one of the problems with, I think, the decline of the classical education in our society is that you don't have the opportunities to even have some of the great texts of Western civilization come across your desk unless you affirmatively seek them out. And even then, you kind of have to sometimes get lucky and have the opportunities presented to you. And most of these aren't realistically accessible to someone sort of self-teaching themselves. You really need to have your soul nurtured, I think, by a great teacher or series of teachers. So when I was at Georgetown, my soul was moved by the brilliance of a number of great teachers, but in particular, a great Catholic philosopher and Jesuit priest, Father James Shaw, very prolific author. I would go so far as to say that he has to be one of the more influential philosophers of the last half century. He must have written at least 100 books. And apart from being a great thinker, just a brilliant thinker, he was a teacher's teacher. He really cared for the souls of his students, and he gave time to anyone whose intellectual hunger brought them to his doorstep. So I consider him a mentor. I consider him a friend. And without question, he formed a lot of my approach to philosophical and theological questions. He wouldn't call himself a theologian. He wasn't an apologist, but his discipline was classical political philosophy. But he taught sort of just truth. He was a friend of truth, and he sort of, I think, formed my intellectual vocabulary going forward in terms of approaching all these topics.
Yeah, so was that where the desire to become a lawyer came from? Was it Father Shaw?
It's funny because Father used to actually joke that he didn't like when his favorite students went to law school because he saw law school as, and there's truth to it, as the place where budding philosophers went to die, so to speak, sell out or whatever. He later on he was pleased that I was at law school when he knew I was doing what I was doing there. But no, he mostly viewed law school as, I think, an unfortunate way of derailing budding philosophers, so to speak. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. When we first chatted, I gave you a lawyer joke. And there's that prevailing attitude. And, there might be some truth to it, especially if you're going to a law school that is very, very secularized or anti-Christian, anti-Catholic, that, that is an area where people could lose their faith or lose their humor. We talked about that too, It's just intense study and not exactly a place to grow as being a Catholic, so to speak.
Yeah, well, let me say this. It certainly is, in some sense, a non sequitur, I guess, to go from, and I'm still practicing law, but to go from that to practicing apologetics. There's a good number of people out there who are convinced that lawyers are the devil, And I think Gospel of Luke, even I think Jesus was railing against attorneys at one point. But Gary, this is a great example of how I think God gives you the opportunities and experiences you need to have. He puts you in the places you need to be in order to best serve Him. And so, from an apologetics perspective, apart from a number of other things that you want to have command of, I wouldn't be the same critical thinker. I wouldn't be the same writer if I had not gone to law school. And I think it's certainly on display in just the words I may use or the writing style I may have in some parts of my writing. It's also on display, I think, in just sort of the general outlook I have. I consider myself an advocate for Christ, which is, I think, at heart what all apologists are. But being that is my secular vocation, I really see advocacy as almost a sacred role to play. It's a very heavy label to sort of confer on myself. And look, law school, I think, maybe inadvertently, but it does teach certain skills that are undeniably very helpful for the apologetics mission, whether that is the value of drawing very careful distinctions or the importance of thoroughly understanding your counter argument before you go ahead and try to refute it. And in a way, that kind of brings us back full circle to the scholastic method that predominated in the High Middle Ages, where a lot of formative texts were produced. In the scholastic tradition, if two people were disputing an issue, you couldn't go ahead and put forward your own view until you had restated in your own words what the counter position was. And the reason for that was twofold. First, if you can't restate something in your own words, chances are you don't fully understand it, and so you don't really have any business plowing ahead and refuting it. And second, it gave the person on the other side of the table the opportunity to raise their hand before you go ahead and say, no, that's not what I was saying. You're wrong. This is what I was saying. And then you get on the same page. You're speaking the same language. You're not talking past each other to make sure there's precision in what's being debated. We have political debates going on today. Just imagine how much more constructive it would be if both sides at the very outset at least were clear that they're talking about the same thing. And of course, this scholastic method is on display no better place than in the writings of Thomas Aquinas, especially in his Summa, where he states what the question is to be addressed. He goes through very faithfully, not in a straw man fashion, he very faithfully lays out the best of what he wants to refute. He puts forward his evidence, all his cards on the table, and then he talks about it, and you know that he's on the same page with the people that he's disputing. So it's a great method.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right that is something that we sorely miss today, not only in secular life, but even in apologetics, that people will talk past each other. And, it's often like two ships passing in the night. There's never really any contact or common ground that we see that we're able to explain and clear up. And I hear the music coming up. We are chatting with Peter Cavallaro, and author of Fragments, a Theological Story. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics.
We got Ernesto from Long Beach.
I just wanted to comment, and I just wanted to thank you guys. And I kind of wanted to encourage people that are listening, maybe that are not donating, because honestly, I got to be honest, I used to think you guys were a little
too over the top.
Yeah.
That's right.
If God gave us a lot, and I have the blessing of listening to all this, and I just want to call all the people. I got 5 kids, and I don't make a lot of money, and I'm still donating to you guys.
God bless you, brother. You're amazing.
We have to do this. We have to do the extra. And it's not even the extra. People see it like it's extra. Kneeling for communion, saying your rosary, saying the Divine Mercy Chaplet. It is not extra. It's what the church tells us to do.
Amen. You're a good man, brother.
30 years old, 29 years old, 5 kids, and I thank you guys. But everybody else, man, get on fire. Fight for the truth, man. I know what I'm telling you guys.
I love it.
Out there.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Peter Cavallaro about we're about to get to his book, Fragments, a Theological Story. But, Peter, right before the break, you made a great point about how the medieval tradition has this idea that you need to understand your opponent's position. And, on this show, I call it the Apologetics Dojo, but it's not really karate. The best apologetics is a grappling sport like judo. You have to have a firm grip on your opponent's position, before you can take it down, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that you do yourself a disservice for putting forward a straw man because, while maybe in the short term it lets you write out something good on paper or make a good point if it's in a verbal dialogue format. But at the end of the day, you're sort of just sweeping the underlying issues to your position under the rug.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, okay, you're out of law school. You're getting work as a lawyer. You have this Catholic background, philosophy background. So what made you think of diving into apologetics, like writing a book?
Well, a lot of it goes back to my more intellectual awakening that I experienced under the tutelage of Father Shaw. I mean, once you sort of go forward with philosophy, you really never look back in the sense of seeing your whole life as one big search for truth, and seeing your own skill sets as simply avenues to pursue that search for truth. And for me, I've always been interested in writing. And that was one of the things I think actually motivating going to law school, as with many other people, where they think that the law is a way of, I think, exercising your writing skills, which is true. But for me, I wanted to sort of give voice to ideas that I had, and I wanted to contribute to this millennia-long chorus that had already been long sort of in progress, which I was sort of simply lending my own voice to. But to me, it was very important to try to contribute in some small way to that conversation.
Yeah. So what was the idea that spawned it, though? Was it any particular dialogue you had with somebody, or maybe something you saw out there that really needed to be addressed?
Well, so I guess I'll say this, and for listeners who haven't read the book, it's a little hard to categorize even between fiction and nonfiction. There are components of it that are, I mean, certainly at heart, it's an apologetics work where I'm attempting to put forward certain proofs for the existence of God, as well as engaging some other classic debates, such as the problem of evil and the mystery of creation. But I don't do it in the form of a textbook or a treatise. It's actually in the form of a loose literary novel where I use the fictional skeleton as a framing device to put forward my ideas. And specifically, it's in the form of a dialogue between characters. In this instance, engaging in some minimal world building, I have a hypothetical world where gods walk among humankind and have been hunted to near extinction by these sort of jaded humans. And the principal character, who's known as the God Slayer, is encountering some of the last few deities and has some burning questions that needs to be addressed, along the lines of these discussion points. And so the dialogues come out where the God Slayer is facing down the God who, is being compelled or requested to sort of engage in this discourse, potentially to save his life. And I think knowing that and having said that, the answer to your question, Gary, is that this actually arises from two separate projects that I had on the shelf and had been working on intermittently at various times, at different times, including maybe as at its earliest, almost 10 years ago. So the nonfiction piece I had actually started in my later years in college, having delved into Aquinas and classical philosophical ideas and theology. I was just in my spare time trying to dabble in some of these topics and wanting to challenge myself to see, what novel ideas, large or small, could I come up with that could kind of lend themselves to this conversation. And I had some writings that were coming along. And separate from that, a few years later, I think it was on a business trip as an attorney, but it happened several times after that. I was starting to write and then crumble up and then rewrite what started out as a poem, but it was sort of this poetic rendering of the creation of the world in a very allegorical format, similar to Genesis. But it was clear that it was sort of in this mythological universe where, it was, again, very allegorical and poetic. And for a long time, I didn't know who the speaker was or what the context of this poem. But at a certain point, I sort of started thinking, well, suppose this is a deity sort of narrating in real time how the world was created. And suppose this deity is saying all this to someone standing at their front door. In fact, someone called the God Slayer who has come to their front door that day to do them harm. And I thought that was just a fascinating idea. And then at a certain later point, I had the idea, I could synthesize these and I could kind of use this fictional part as sort of the vehicle to convey the non-fictional stuff that I'd already been working on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what struck me when I saw your book was your background. You love Aquinas, and reading Aquinas, for me, it's awesome because I'm really a pedantic reader. I love, I could read a telephone book if it was about apologetics, but it's very systematic. There's no fluff. Aquinas kind of discourages the use of the imagination. And yet, your book, your approach seems almost the opposite of it, because what you're doing is you're using fiction as a vehicle to introduce people to ideas from Aquinas and others.
Totally, and certainly, in substance, I draw a lot of inspiration from the thought of Aquinas. In style, I would say for this book, not as much. In some ways, it's very similar to the writings of Plato in the sense that he would style a lot of his philosophy in the form of a dialogue. And also, used myths and other poetic references sort of interspersed. But I think the thing that explains mostly the format of the book is a little bit more simple, which is, again, going back to my desire to kind of lend my voice in a unique way to something that's certainly been said many times over, and some ideas that have been explored, wanting to put a new spin on it, both substantively but also stylistically, and maybe with a thought that this could attract people into this debate, into this conversation that ordinarily would not pick up Aquinas, because Aquinas, for all of his virtues and beauty of his writings, is not, I think, accessible to the common person of today, certainly, in a younger age group. And so, recognizing the need to sort of speak to all people, on any fronts of any theaters of war that we can, I wanted to sort of expand the theaters of war, so to speak, to, a new format.
Yeah, so someone wouldn't sit down and read maybe Carl Keating's Catholicism, Fundamentalism, but with your book, it's something of high fiction, right? That they could approach it just as a fun book to read, and yet encounter, some really substantive arguments.
Yeah, and what I like to say about someone who is on the fence about opening it up is just simply to say that at bottom, what I really tried to do with this book is create something that on every page you'll encounter a thought-provoking idea or argument or something that either challenges what you think or puts a new spin on something that maybe you've already had thoughts about, or puts a thought in your head that maybe you didn't even have. And on the topic of how there's heavy fiction and allegory involved in the book, interspersed with these substantive arguments, there's actually my reason for doing that is because, going back to Aquinas, the one thing that he committed his life to was the fundamental synthesis and compatibility between faith and reason. And I see the work of an apologetic exercise as harnessing the proper degrees of faith and reason, and I'll even throw, you might call it, for lack of a better term, mythology into the mix. These traditional avenues from which man has been pulled toward God's direction throughout our history. And so the book actually, the different speakers, the different deities that are encountered throughout the book are there's 3 rough divisions there. Each one of them is meant to represent a different avenue. One is a lot more faith heavy, one is more intellectual, reason heavy, and then the other is more mythologically heavy, sort of not giving straight answers and appealing to sort of intuition rather than cognition, so to speak.
Interesting. Yeah, it's that's one of the reasons I have you on the show, because I think it's a brilliant way to present these arguments and ideas in a way that's accessible to most people today. And there is a stream of philosophers and theologians who have done this, like C.S. Lewis, Ayn Rand, a few others that tapped into, giving their philosophy through, let's say, a fictional novel. Did any of those writers or works kind of blazed the way for you, or was this entirely independent of their work?
I would say it was largely independent, although I would say that I do see at a large, at a facial level, some similarities with the Screwtape Letters, in the sense that the Screwtape Letters convey very profound truths in a totally, imagined scenario. And they do so precisely, I think, to give readers a little bit more of a spicier, more intriguing context to explore that stuff. And so I do definitely pay homage to Lewis's idea to use that as a vehicle for apologetics. Yeah,
that's one aspect of apologetics that I think most apologists don't realize, is that you need to instill, the wonder, the majesty, along with the data. We often, it's a lot easier to give data. It's a lot harder to hook people with, providing this background.
Absolutely.
Imaginative background to understand it. And I hear the music coming up, Peter. We'll hold it right there. We're chatting with Peter Cavallaro and his book, Fragments, A Theological Story. More to come on the other side of the break. You listen to Hands on Apologetics.
Help the Helpless, a Minnesota St. Paul nonprofit organization chaired by Father of Tyr and volunteers, is humbly asking you for your kind support to help the poor and the handicapped children in India and Ecuador. Through financial support from the Help of the Helpless benefactors, the children are provided with clothing, food, education, shelter, and the teachings of the Catholic Church. The mission is to help children thrive and become self-sufficient young adults leading productive lives. We also provide aid to poor families in Ecuador with food baskets, medicines, medical assistance, and help with funeral needs for the deceased. The work in India is done by Father Antonio's organization, St. Mary's. In Ecuador, the work is being done by the Servant Sisters of the Home of Mother. You can call us at 877-762-8857. To learn more, please visit our website, www.helpthehelpless.org. God bless you.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites The Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Master Apologist Peter Cavallaro, the author of Fragments, a Theological Story, and we were just talking about the book, Peter. Now, I don't want to spoil anything in the book, so maybe we could take it from the level of the book to a more abstract level. Let's just talk about theistic apologetics. What arguments for the existence of God do you think are most effective, and why?
Well, I certainly think it's important to consider the prospective audience, and I think that apologist wants to have sort of the right tool for the job, depending on their audience. I personally, and part of my approach to the book was to emphasize proofs or arguments that I found most compelling. And, I think that someone of my generation might think that arguments drawn from their own experience, arguments drawn from their own interactions with the world, are ones that could ultimately kind of get them through. I mean, to me, the number one, I think, concept that I simply still can't get around is how atheists, and there are many of them, get so much pleasure out of nature and almost encounter a sort of a sanctity in nature, and don't really face the contradiction that I think has to lie in that state of affairs, which is, to put your money where your mouth is. There can't be any sanctity to nature. It has to be what I say in the book is an ornate accident, and so I emphasize that, and I'm someone who loves nature and who loves the wilds, the wilderness, and I think God can be found there, even to sort of people who are not really open to Him at the time. They may not know it, but I think God can easily be encountered there. So I see that as one of the soft underbellies of the atheists, if I may say that.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're absolutely right, because Aquinas, even in his Summa, he assumes an awful lot on the reader, that they have this Aristotelian background, they understand certain categories. You can't approach the average person on the street with that assumption, or you can, but it'd be utter failure, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think that is a good target point is beauty, and that immediate experience. How do you explain that experience, and which belief system makes best sense of that experience?
Right. And if I could pause on Aquinas's famous cosmological arguments, I mean, I personally find them very compelling. There were a few points when I was starting to study Aquinas that just blew me away, and they were simply these, sentences that were very heavy and not very reader friendly, especially to someone who's just getting into them. But just the idea of the uncaused first cause and the unmoved first mover. I mean, these are concepts that don't need to be richly adorned with flowery writing, as Thomas abhorred. It could simply be. They speak for themselves. Their truth is so self-evident. So I definitely think that the Aquinas ways, for example, are still to this day, among the best of the best. I think that one thing that an apologist realizes pretty quickly is there's some people who, you can talk about faith all you want. You can talk about having God touch your soul and having a road to Damascus experience. But they and a lot of lawyers will sympathize with this. They want the facts. You got to show me on a blackboard how you get God. I don't want to hear about the faith. I need to hear the facts. But then there's also people for whom any number of brilliant intellectual arguments are going to ring hollow. They're going to be wooden, because at the end of the day, they need to be touched by the faith component. And so something like Aquinas's proofs, which I think have continued to stand the test of time, apart from being not so reader friendly if if they're reading the primary sources, it's also not necessarily even if it's something that I think still stands up, it's not going to necessarily bring somebody all the way, because I think there's always going to be that 5%, even if someone's at 95%, that they kind of just need to be comfortable with the uncertainty of ultimately knowing 100%. That things can be proved to their satisfaction,
Yeah, absolutely. And there's people who won't believe in electricity unless you can show them the formula that proves its existence. Then there's others that if you flip a switch on and the light goes on, that's proof enough. It exists. You experience the electricity, right? One thing also with your approach for your book, and also what you just said, is since people today, by and large, are not trained in any way, shape, or form in formal philosophic thought, okay, simply getting them to ask the questions and to ponder things the correct way, that may not take them all the way to belief in God and entering the Catholic Church, but it's an important first step, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, one thing that Father Shaw used to say is there's just so many, this is why we need, a return to classical education at all levels. There are so many things you need to know in order to know, in order to even, in order to understand Scripture, you need to understand the historical context that it took place. You need to have some understanding of, textual analysis. You need to understand epistemology. You need to understand, in some sense, poetry, or just artistic flourishes of humankind. Just to sort of understand the human spirit. I mean, there's a lot of auxiliary topics that you kind of need to master in order to then channel your efforts toward the highest things, which is philosophical and ultimately theological.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because, like I said, most people don't have that background. So in a way, as apologists, not only do we have to give the proofs, but we have to supply what they're lacking, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To give them a leg up on those other areas that they lost because they didn't have classical education.
Totally.
Yeah. So I like that, the imagination, asking questions, getting them to think in the proper direction. And there's such a hunger today too. Spiritual but not religious category is getting to be a huge demographic. Mm-hmm. And I think your book really I cries out for those type of people, isn't it? Because it's kind of a soft way to point them in the right direction.
Right. Anyone who labels themselves as spiritual but not religious, at the end of the day, is not going to be satisfied with sort of a, half, 1 foot on the dock, 1 foot on the boat sort of approach. Their intellect is going to demand answers for them about the cosmos, about their existence. And so if Catholicism is not there to fill that void and provide cogent proofs or cogent arguments that they find compelling, they're not going to see it as a viable option for them.
Yeah. And if they don't hear it, they'll just assume there is none. Right? I know
Absolutely.
A lot of people have done that.
Yep.
So, I think there is a lot of hunger, for this kind of knowledge, but the fact is they don't even know it's out there, so to speak.
Well, and that goes back to Augustine. I mean, there is a timeless our hearts are yearning for God. That doesn't change, no matter how much noise there is out there, no matter how many distractions there are from our pop culture, which has frankly become antithetical to a search for truth. That doesn't shut the spigot of our longing for God. And so maybe it distracts from it. Maybe it puts up hurdles for seeking God. But it's kind of like eventually, we're still going to be engaging on that journey. And so our role as apologists is to simply, I think, put up as many traffic signs and, road signs as we can to get people on the right track. We're kind of GPSs in that regard, getting people, because they're still on the journey. The question is, are they going to get to, the right destination?
Yeah, right. Yeah, very well put. So, Peter, what do you do outside writing? I mean, obviously, you have your first book published. Do you do work within your parish? Do you do talks, seminars, anything like that?
So I actually just relocated back to where I've grown up in Long Island. I do writing locally, and I am looking to do some more talks. I like to engage with folks. When I was in law school, I did some talks, and that's a demographic that is, again, probably absent someone like me giving a talk, that there may not even be a voice, in that context. But yeah, I'm a big believer in sort of deep roots at the local level in the community, because I think that, going back all the way to Socrates, truth is pursued in conversation. Truth is pursued in ordinary, everyday interactions with other people. In fact, that's the entirety of Christ's mission was perpetrated as a one-on-one set of interactions at a localized level. I mean, our entire belief in salvation history is that the incarnation occurred not in little towns all over the world. It occurred in one spot at a local level, and touched individual human souls one at a time, day in and day out. And I think that, I like to follow that model on a miniature level. And I think that that's the most effective way to touch anyone and impact anyone's life.
Amen. Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, our hour has flown. Where could people go to get a hold of Fragments, a Theological Story?
The best place to get that, as well as virtually anything you could think of, is Amazon.com at this point.
Okay. Excellent. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. And like I said, you're doing great work, so keep it up.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And that's Peter Cavallaro. And yeah, check out his book, Fragments, a Theological Story. I love the approach. It's fresh, it's unique, and I think it's very, very accessible for people today to start thinking philosophically in a way that's gripping. So pick it up. It's at Amazon.com. And also, I want to remind everybody that the Apocrypha Apocalypse project is underway. So if you could, just go to YouTube, type in Apocrypha Apocalypse, or my name. And by the way, you will get my channel that I just opened, which is dedicated to the question of the Old Testament canon. Lots of interviews coming up. We're going to do live streams, and I'll keep you abreast of that. Also, don't forget us at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. If you please support us through your prayers, support us financially if you can, and support us through social media. So tell your friends about us, share shows that you enjoyed here on Virgin Most Powerful Radio, and don't be afraid to subscribe. Smash that subscription button, because in social media land, subscriptions, thumbs up, all that stuff makes it more visible. And being more visible helps us in our outreach to make Jesus better known and loved. Wow. Okay, so it's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center here and turn off the dojo lights. But never fear, Terry and Jesse will soon be here with the Terry and Jesse Show. High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you. And thank you so much for listening to the show. And we'll be back again tomorrow, God willing, with this thing we call Hands-On Apologetics. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.